Benchmark, the voice of business. Presented by LMD.
On this edition of Benchmark, Rajeev Amarasuriya, Senior Legal Consultant of Amarasuriya Associates, is in the hot seat as we focus on the state of the nation. The LMD Nielsen Business Confidence Index plummeted to its lowest level in more than a decade in May. Nielsen's Managing Director Sharang Path has more. And we wrap up the show with LMD's columnist Shiran Fernando, who reviews Sri Lanka's economy against the backdrop of the current situation in the country. That's the lineup for Benchmark.
Welcome to yet another edition of Benchmark. I'm Savitri Rodrigo. We're continuing our discussion on the state of the nation. And with us in the studio today is Rajeev Amarasuriya, attorney at law and senior legal consultant of Amarasuriya Associates. He's also a member of the SEC. Ahead in the program, we discussed the country's reconciliation efforts and also the government's response on the terrorist attacks, as well as the mob violence that followed, and also the lessons that we can learn from countries that have had similar experiences. So Rajeev, good to have you on the show once again. Thank you so much for joining us. What is your overall assessment of how Sri Lanka stands at the moment?
I think the whole country, the government, the security forces were taken by surprise by the 21st April attacks. So I think it has affected the entire country, but I think also we have the problem of there seems to be a lot of division, suspicion among the communities. So those are also, problems which, qualitative problems which need to be addressed. It's a little early in the day to ascertain exactly the impact. So we need to be conscious of all this going forward. So
the war ended 10 years ago, but then the Easter Sunday attacks happened. There was mob violence that was resultant to that against Muslim homes, trading establishments, mosques and all. And also we had a nationwide curfew as well as a social media ban. What is your take on the country's reconciliation efforts, the national reconciliation efforts that have taken place in the last 10 years? Or have we had any reconciliation at all?
There was a lot of progress. There was some progress, but a lot of it has now been reversed in view of the problems which took place on the 21st of April. I think if you look at national reconciliation, you can look at two time frames. One post 2009 up to 2015 and 2015 up to now. The focus under the previous regime was to bring about reconciliation through development, infrastructure development. And they did a lot of work, I think, in the northern province and, roads and buildings and all that came up, schools and all such infrastructure. Then we had the lessons learned and reconciliation committee, which was chaired by former Attorney General C.R. De Silva. There was a lot of work which went into that commission, and I think there was many good recommendations, but unfortunately several of those were not implemented. Then we come to 2015, and the focus was slightly different. The approach to the international community was different. And there was a lot of engagement with the United Nations Human Rights Council. And in fact, the government came under a lot of flack because they co-sponsored several resolutions. I think that it was probably prudent at the time to get engaged the HRC. Because at the time there was a lot of pressure on Sri Lanka. There were threats of sanctions being imposed, so on and so forth. So with the engagement, there were certain measures which were required of Sri Lanka. Now reconciliation, some people think it may be pleasing the international community. That is not the case. There is a lot of pressure, no doubt. But if we are going to move forward as a country, we look at we are looking at Singapore, Malaysia. We need to sort out our internal house problems, and this is a problem we have. So we need to look at it as something not what the outside world is telling us, but we need to get our house in order. So to that extent, it is important, but also we have to have a practical approach. Now, after the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal, there was a general in Croatia who was indicted before the War Crimes Tribunal. But by the mere fact of his indictment, he was the center of the nationalist movement. So we can't afford to have such a situation which will take back the reconciliation even further back. So we have to be practical. We must understand what can be done, and in order to bring the communities and also to bring trust and confidence among all. Savitri, in that respect, now sometimes there is accusation that the majority community may not be doing its part, but certainly that is important. But the minorities also have a role to play, because there is a tendency of grouping. The minorities work among themselves. In a society like ours, we need the races, the religions to participate with each other, not have their private communities, and then for certain things get involved with the other communities. So I think everyone has a role to play in this process.
When it came to the mob violence, there are reports that the security forces watched while the mobs attacked establishments and homes, and that this happened even during curfew times. From a legal perspective, was the government's response adequate to what happened?
I think initially the emergency came on a little later. I think there was some the armed forces could not go in as and when they pleased, but then the emergency regulations came into place. The government, I don't have any doubt that there was any lack of response from the government. They did whatever they could do at the time. But Sri Lanka is not a small country, and when something happens in one village, to mobilize the forces to that particular location might take a little bit of time. So, and also there are various allegations that these are organized attacks. If it was a community, if they were attacking the neighbors, that is a different matter. But this was not that case. This is a case where outsiders, those who were not known by the neighbors, the community came in and attacked. So that could happen in Colombo 7. You could have a group of people coming and smashing a few houses in 10-15 minutes and going away. You might not be able to get the forces in. So it was very unfortunate, and I think the government also failed to the extent that they didn't properly disseminate the information and properly respond to those issues. When it was happening, maybe they could have come on national television and brought these matters to the attention and basically advise the public. But of course, having said that, none of that would have worked, because these are all organized as the allegations are.
And how would you assess the government's response from a PR point of view?
Well, a lot of people have written and spoken about it in the media. The initial response was very disappointing. I think everyone was taken by surprise. Now, just take, for example, the statement by the Defence Secretary, the then Defence Secretary, when I think he was at the St. Anthony's Church, when he spoke to a foreign correspondent from his vehicle, and he said that the government was not responsible to protect the hotels. Whether that was so or not, that's a different matter. But that is not something in a crisis situation you tell an international reporter. Those things go out, and those are headlines. So I think there was one thing I saw was that, now even take the example of a small company or even a listed company. When there is a statement to be made, there is a designated person who will make that statement, whether it's the chairman or the CEO. Sometimes we sit at meetings, and when somebody comes to make representations, we decide, well, X and Y will answer those questions. Not everyone. So what happened was, as soon as this took place, ministers and government leaders went on their social media channels. They started communicating. So there should have been a central point where the information went out, and only those people should have commented. So obviously, with the lack of information, when you go and make statements, sometimes you are found to be wrong. So from a PR point, of course, that was all. Basically, there's a concept in management called muddling through. So the first few days was, I would say that, but then of course they got their act together.
So what do you think we could learn from other countries that have had similar experiences? This is certainly not a first.
I actually did some research on this, and I found that France is probably a good benchmark. France has about 80 million visitors coming in annually, largest number of visitors coming in. In 2015, they had a similar spate of attacks. And For 2 years, their tourism was down, but in 2017 it picked up again, and it's growing at a pace which is more than the average. So they obviously got the act together, though it took, obviously it took some time, but they got the act together. A few learnings from France. One was that immediately, days after the attack, the then President Holland, he mobilized around 10,000 security forces personnel at about 1,000 strategic key locations. One was to re-establish security, but another was to give the confidence to the people that things are safe. So that is very important. You need to give, you might have the situation under control, but the people must feel that. You need to have ways and means of doing that. Then, of course, in France, the inbound tourism reduced, as I said, for 2 years, but the local tourism picked up. Within about 12 months, the local tourism, the locals were again traveling. So that's something we need to focus on, because however much we do work to promote outside tourism, it will take some time. So until then, the locals must start traveling and make it viable for them. There were then also soon after the attacks, they had meetings of all the stakeholders, from airports to ministries to whatever departments to airlines. All of them got together. They had different meetings and they had a common strategy they came up. And so everyone is working with one single strategy.
So we'll be continuing this discussion, Rajeev, after the break. Coming up after the break, Rajeev Amarasuriya touches on how Sri Lanka can rebuild its image in the eyes of the international community. Stay tuned.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal. LMD podcast now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
$8,500 done. 1,500 to go. Hoorah!
What on earth are you doing?
I'm making money.
You're crazy.
Crazy for money. 10,000 steps done. Who the man? I do it every single day. Show me the money.
So you run 10,000 steps every day, huh? You must be fit.
Some days I do 20,000. Hoorah!
Thank you for staying with Benchmark. Let's now resume our discussion on the state of the nation with Rajeev Amarasuriya, attorney at law and senior legal counsel for Amarasuriya Associates, as well as he is a member of the SEC. Rajeev, in your view, what does reuniting or regaining Sri Lanka mean for the country as a whole?
Well, it's very important, but of course this is something which will take some time, given our particular predicament. Our society, as you know, post 21st of April is now very divided. There is a lot of suspicion among the communities, among people. People don't trust their neighbors sometimes. So the process will take some time. There is no overnight solution. But I think what is most important is that we ensure that the security situation is brought to normalcy, that the threat is neutralized. That is vital. Also in this process, anyone who was involved in this, in what took place on April 21st, not only those who were directly involved, there are supporters, instigators, those who have influenced. All of those people need. That is the only way confidence can be actually reinstated. But I don't know, reconciliation for Sri Lanka, I'm a little pessimistic now, given what has happened, given what we had in 2009. If it does happen, if we can actually achieve true reconciliation in this country, it will be a wonderful thing because we have everything else going for us. But I think a few things we need to also try to move as a society. One is we have several minority political parties. Now the problem in having minority political parties is that they have a certain voter base. They come through the system and they have certain numbers of members of parliament. Now if a government does not have the majority directly, you have to rely on these groups, the minority parties, and then you have no choice but to sometimes agree to their requests and demands. This is something which actually took place, I think, post the 1990s. Previously, what we had were the leaders of the various minority groups within the main parties. You have the Muslim leaders, the Tamil the leaders within the party and on both sides. So whichever party comes into, or whichever side comes in, the representation is there. And when you are in a wider system, then you can give and take and the system, and you can work within that system. So that's something, I don't know how it can be done, whether we can find some legal solution to it, but we must promote all these groups to come within the system, then work in pockets and then make demands which sometimes governments have no choice, whether it's the present government or the previous government. I mean, some of these ministers when people are making allegations, they have been there right along. So the system needs to be changed. Then in addition to that, I think there is this concept of divide and rule among the politicians also. I think the media also has a huge role to play, because media can be a force which brings people together. But we have seen sometimes, they are driven by, sometimes some media are driven by political motives, some are, sometimes commercial. And it is very easy for the media to, it's in real time. So if you want to disrupt, you want to, bring something down, it is possible. And we have seen situations where, say someone makes a statement, they put bits and pieces together and gives a completely different interpretation. So the authorities also must strike down hard on truant activity like that, so that it does not happen in the future.
What has been the extent of the recent attacks on the economy when you look at it in total? It's not just been tourism, but we've also seen a decline in trade between Sri Lanka and Pakistan. The fallout has been much more.
Obviously, the impact was huge. After 21st of April, the mob attacks were totally unnecessary, which complicated the matters even further. The governor of the central bank recently at a forum said that the affectation on the productive capacity has not really been touched to that extent of the country. But as you know, tourism has been directly affected. 5% of GDP is from tourism, 5% of employment is from tourism, and 5% of VAT collections, which affects the fiscal. The domestic consumption also will naturally reduce because income has come down, and that would affect the growth estimates. But from a quantitative point of view, it's a little too early to determine as to what the affectation is. But even though a large segment of our productive capacity has not been directly affected, there is indirect affectation. Now, for example, the insurance premium would go up, has gone up. There are increased security costs. Now you have to, it's a completely different ball game. And I understand that even travel insurance for people coming into Sri Lanka is not being offered, and even several airlines have now reduced the number of times they come in. So these are things which will take time to revert. Maybe the problem, because of the problem, they have reduced the frequency, but to bring them back, they have now rerouted. So that would take some time. As I mentioned, I repeatedly mentioned security, the normalcy needs to be brought back. That is vital. I think from the tourism point of view, the travel advisories have to be, we have to work towards removing those travel advisories, or at least softening them. Now the stock market also went down by about 6%. The indices went down by about 6% and the volumes dropped. But a lot of the foreign investors did not flee this country. They stayed back. And in fact, in the month, the post 21st of April, we had about 3.6 billion rupees of inflows, and it was about 1.7 billion net inflow, which is actually a little higher than the previous few months. So there is, I think, there is confidence that it's not all bad, and there is potential. But these are difficult times.
In your opinion, how can Sri Lanka rebuild its image in the eyes of the international community?
There's a lot of things we need to do. When one says image, brand, of course, it affects a lot of areas, mostly, as you know, tourism. Now, from a tourism point of view, we were the number one according to Lonely Planet, picked us as number one, and the high, as you know, higher you go, the harder the fall is harder, and that is what happened to us. From the international point of view, we have lost face on, I would say, 3 accounts principally. One is that it's no longer a safe tourist destination as it were before, so we need to address that. Then, of course, the inability of our security forces to have prevented what took place, and the delay in responding to what took place. Also, there were reports that the National Security Council had not met on several occasions. There were some issues with the constitution. Now, these are the composition of the council. Now, these are matters which the international community are watching. And if at the highest level we have problems of this nature, these are not things the international community will forget within weeks, because these are fundamental structural problems we have. So we need to address those and give confidence that these will never happen again. Then, of course, additionally, we had the riots. And of course, another problem I see in our present setup is that sometimes the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. And now, especially with the issues between the president and the cabinet. So those are things which need to be addressed if we are to rebuild the image. But on all fronts, we need to address on all these fronts. It's not just going out with a promotional campaign saying come back to Sri Lanka, but I think structurally, fundamentally, we need to maybe reposition ourselves, correct our mistakes. And people make mistakes, but the learning from the mistake has to be brought out, and we must correct ourselves so that it will never happen again.
So thank you so much, Rajeev, for joining us once again. We do hope that good sense will prevail.
Yeah, I hope so.
So that was Rajeev Amarasuriya discussing the state of the nation. He's the senior legal consultant of Amarasuriya Associates, and he's an attorney at law as well as a member of the SEC. On the other side, Anushan Selvaraja has more.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal. LMD podcast now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
$8,500 done. 1,500 to go. Hoorah!
What on earth are you doing?
I'm making money.
You're crazy.
Crazy for money. 10,000 steps done. Who the man? I do it every single day. Show me the money.
So you run 10,000 steps every day, huh? You must be fit.
Some days I do 20,000. Hoorah!
Welcome back to Benchmark. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. Now for a closer look at the latest on the LMD Nielsen Business Confidence Index. Joining me is the Managing Director of Nielsen, Sharang Pant. Welcome back to the show, Sharang. Now, how has the BCI performed so far?
So Anushan, the Easter Sunday bombings have had an impact on the way the things are moving in the country. Talk about business confidence, it is down to 62 compared to 77 in the previous month. If you just look at the last 6 months from a level of 120, it's basically halved at 62 now. This is one of the lowest levels since the last 8 to 10 years now. That's where we are in terms of business confidence.
What about consumption then, Sharang? How is that doing?
There is an underlying fear that we see in the market. We spoke to leaders, we spoke to consumers. The fear is keeping them at home. So take the example of tourism industry. While yes, you cannot expect foreigners to come in at this point of time, even the domestic travelers have stopped traveling, which is why you see the hotels half empty or full empty as of now. That's one part of the story. But if you look at day-to-day consumption behavior, yes, we cannot expect consumers to go out and buy durables right now, but even daily consumption categories are getting impacted. But the question is it because consumers like you and me are eating less of rice or less of dal or less of chicken every day? The answer to that is no. The answer lies in whether the retail outlets or the avenues for shopping are open or not. These are remaining closed, not just because of the bombings, but because of the ethnic tension after that. Most of the retail outlets are still remaining closed or half closed, and which is what is impacting the retail sale in the country.
What do respondents have to say about our business and investment prospects?
So that has suffered the most. Just about 2% still feel that Sri Lanka can be an investment venue or avenue. Still people talk about how this government will take care of the security aspects. They're not necessarily talking about the policy, but the security aspects right now, and therefore the country is not being seen as a safe investment bet at this point of time.
Where do you stand on our economy then?
Talking about the economy, just about 6% or 1 in 15 respondents say that the economy may improve in the next 12 months. 70% of them are saying it is going to worsen. They've seen some numbers from the past, the GDP slowing down in the Q4. There were some positives as well in terms of exports still growing, imports coming down as per the latest Q1 numbers. But April and the period post that is going to impact the economy, and we will see a short-term to a mid-term impact on overall growth for Sri Lanka.
What about the most pressing national and business related issues at this point of time?
So as of now, if you talk about the top of mind national and business issues, they're still the same. It's inflation, it is the currency, and it is the state of the economy. About 50 to 60% of the respondents do talk about these issues. But what is now coming up are things like terrorism, security, and how it is going to impact the economy in general. So these are 3 or 4 new worries that have come up in the latest round of the survey, and almost 30 to 40% of the respondents are calling out these aspects as issues for both the nation as well as the business.
What would then be your predictions for the BCI, Sharang?
Both business confidence and consumer confidence will stay muted for now, for the next 2 or 3 months. What both leaders as well as consumers are looking for are some cues from the authorities, from the policy makers, on where is the country in terms of security, where is the country in terms of measures being taken to revive business growth and revive confidence in the economy as such. So both leaders and consumers will look for cues, and hopefully in 3 to 4 months time there might be a small upward movement. We hope for that.
Thank you very much for joining us, Sharang.
Thank you, Anisha.
That was the Managing Director of Nielsen, Sharang Pant. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. Stay tuned.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. Now for a closer look at the latest on the economy. Joining me is economist and LMD columnist Shiran Fernando. Welcome back to the show, Shiran. Now, just how do you view the performance of the economy considering what has taken place, and also the pickup in inflation? Are we going to see a higher inflation rate?
So I think now it's been more than a month since everything's happened, unfortunately. I think the concern, as it was soon after, was the impact in terms of investment and in terms of growth as well. On the investment side, we did see a few signings, at least by the BOI, showing that at least some degree of foreign investors are still, signing the deals, completing those transactions in. So that's a good sign. But I think it's very clear to see on the tourism side, the sector as a whole being affected with the earnings and coming down, and also the subsequent travel advisories that were put in place. But now some of them are slowly, at least, reducing in terms of the warning. So a few good signs here and there. We also saw the central bank. I mean, you cited inflation as well. It has been growing for a few months, but even despite that, I think the central bank took the view that they need to support growth and also bring down the lending rates, which have been high and not responding to some of the market treasury rates, which have come down. So I think they would have weighted their view towards that rather than on inflation, which has been rising. So they decided to cut both the rates as well. So that was an interesting move given this backdrop as well. But I think given where the country is in terms of growth and needing more investment on the ground, I think that decision was made.
Could you give us a brief overview of how the export and manufacturing sectors are performing?
So exports are doing quite well in terms of the performance, in particular in the first quarter. I think it's up close to slightly higher above than 5%. And also, I mean, most of it is driven by textile and apparel exports. Some of the more agricultural exports have not done too great this year. So that's a good sign. The issue on the trade side, on the export side, is also what's going on with global trade. You have Brexit in one corner, you have also the US-China trade war happening in another corner, and overall concerns about where global trade growth is going and where global GDP growth is going. So in this backdrop, we're seeing certain maybe realignments in global supply chains, and also where trade is happening. Sri Lanka is yet not really too affected by it as yet, but I think if these moves happen, and in particular if more tariffs are put in place and there is big retaliations put in place, then you could really see a big impact. Manufacturing on the side, I think the PMI numbers for April came out very low, but it generally does in April because it's a very slow month with the holidays over the holidays as well. It generally does contract, so there wasn't too much of an anomaly there. But I think this time with the attacks that came and the subsequent impacts in those 10 days in April, I think saw it even further dipping. But I think activity should slowly get back on track in the next few months.
Is the government focused on getting the economy back on track, or if not, what more needs to be done, do you think?
So the main attention, I think, has been diverted towards the tourism sector, and both the formal and I think the informal sector as well. But we're seeing other sectors also not really faring too well and requiring some degree of assistance. There have been certain programs discussed, certain reliefs been discussed, but I think they have to take a more holistic picture of where we are in the economy right now. There's a real need to reassure investors, both who are already here and those who are maybe knocking on the door, or maybe those who not arriving at the door, to get them back as well. So it's a big thing right now is getting that confidence back, and I think that's something that only comes through very sound policy measures and regulations.
Thank you for joining us, Shiran.
Pleasure.
That was economist and LMD columnist Shiran Fernando. Thank you for watching Benchmark, and we hope to see you again next time.